Now, Fight Back with Libby Znaimer on Zoomer Radio.
Good afternoon and welcome. It was lively, it was nasty, and there were lots of zingers. I'm speaking, of course, about last night's final leaders debate. Out of the gate, Kathleen Wynne came on strong with her latest slogan, appropriating the pop culture expression, "Sorry, not sorry." Andrea Horwath went against type. She was newly combative and interrupted the others repeatedly. Presumably her handlers told her to take charge. And Doug Ford took a lot of heat for his lack of a fully costed program, even though the voting has already started. His performance was a bit clumsy at times, but he got his central point across, warning that the prospect of an NDP government is scary, especially for business. So where does this leave us? Did last night change your mind? We practically have a party in studio today. We welcome Kim Wright, NDP strategist. She was an advisor to NDP leader Howard Hampton, and she is with H&K Insights. Mike Van Soelen from Navigator Limited. He's a conservative. And Bob Richardson, a liberal senior counsel with National Public Relations. Hi, and welcome to you all.
Great to be here.
Thanks
Good
for having
afternoon.
us.
Okay, so who won, or was there a winner? Let's start with Kim.
Well, I think we're all going to say our respective leaders won and did what they needed to do to get their points across, some better than others. The reality is that Andrea has a plan, a platform that's been out for coming up on 2 months. The Liberals have just put out one, and we're still waiting, even though many Ontarians have cast votes, we're still waiting for Doug. But apparently he has a caucus and a cabinet all picked out. A little measuring the drapes as far as I'm concerned.
I appreciate that, Kim's sentiment, and we heard it from Andrea last night, and there was a lot of criticism of the PCs for sure for not having a fully costed platform yet. But I also think Ontarians appreciate that really the PCs have pulled together this campaign, their leader in record time, and there's a lot of work that goes into rolling out a platform that's fully costed so that Ontarians could see it. What we're seeing is that, and what I feel in talking to people around the different neighborhoods, is that people want the PCs to get it right. They appreciate that Doug has made a lot of announcements already to date about affordability, and those messages are resonating. I thought last night, to be really honest with your listeners, I thought Doug started out a little clunky. He was a little awkward. He seemed nervous. I've never seen that from him. I don't know if it would have a humanizing effect for some people who don't know how to quite take him yet. But he really then did well. I felt he got his stride in the second half. And sort of those bumper sticker sort of way in which he talks, when I look on Twitter and things today, they're playing better than maybe they even seemed on the screen on the first go.
Well, I thought Kathleen had a strong performance yesterday. I thought she was thoughtful. I thought she was knowledgeable. She's a bit too academic still. I think she needs to be a little bit more political and punchy in her answers, but I thought she did a good job. I thought Doug Ford clearly showed, and I would say I don't think anybody was a big winner or a big loser. I will say I thought Doug Ford was the worst of the three performers. I thought he showed he had no experience, no knowledge, and very little education when it comes to Ontario. I think he is the least qualified leader of any political party in Ontario in the last 30
sorry,
years.
I have
sorry,
to.
But I do.
I have to step in.
And by the way, don't take my word for it. His personal numbers are clearly tanking because they rolled out their team today to kind of back him up and do visuals with him, something that they've resisted doing for the last 3 weeks. So don't take my word for it. They're already compensating for his weaknesses.
Okay, I love it. They're interrupting each other just like last night.
Bob, I think the thing that we miss, especially those of us sort of in the political bubble who are used to this on a day-in, day-out basis, is that the average Ontarian, I'm not sure they just want the most polished, experienced career politician. They're looking to the time for a change sentiment is so strong, and that's why while you will look at Doug in one way, I think the average Ontarian may see Doug as something very different. They see him as someone who isn't perfectly polished, who hasn't rehearsed all his answers, who is taking a layperson's approach to government and thinking about it differently. And that's where it may not resonate with you, in the downtown bubble in which we inhabit, but I do think it may resonate with Ontarians in ways that you may not anticipate today.
But you know what? There's another way of describing that. That's calling not doing your homework and being inexperienced. And by the way, Doug is a politician. He's been a politician for years. He's been a councillor. He's run for mayor. He's run for leader of his party. This is his fourth big election. This "I'm not a politician" nonsense needs to be put to bed.
You know what?
He's as much of a politician as anyone is.
That is a good point. Now,
you can't fundamentally say I was part of a $13 billion government and then say, but I'm not a politician.
But we all appreciate he's just arrived on the Ontario scene.
Toronto is the biggest jurisdiction. He is on a big stage. And frankly, Ontarians expect a platform. They expect to know what is going to happen. At least during the Harris years, we had the common sense revolution. I didn't agree with it. I didn't agree with creating a crisis in education in Ipperwash and Walkerton. But you guys did it, and at least there was a platform. Doug has nothing other than a group of people for a photo op who may or may not be in cabinet because the rest of his candidates are under investigation from Elections Ontario.
I appreciate the fondness with which you spoke of the common sense revolution, and that
I remember it less fondly,
and that great time in our party's history. And I think people in Ontarians are looking for that again, and they appreciate that.
Well, they're certainly not getting it from you guys. You have no platform.
They appreciate that Doug and the team have had to work really hard in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months since he became leader, and that things are a little chaotic. But at the same time, they appreciate the simple announcements that he's making. And people mock, a buck of beer, but that speaks to affordability.
It also speaks to Tim Hudak trying to do this.
He's made billions of dollars in promises. He said no one's getting laid off. People are just wondering, and to keep hammering 4 cents on the dollar of fine deficiencies, but not where. I mean, I think that really is a problem.
And I think buck of beer looks credible when you have a plan. And you're putting it out. I can accept that, and I get that. And when you have a plan, when you don't have a plan, it looks like a stunt, and that's the difference between the two things.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
The Liberals would certainly know stunts, and offering things that they well costed will see deficits in this province till the end of time. I think the. Look, this stuff is breaking through, and it's not the perfectly packaged piece that everyone wants to see. And look, at the end of the day, the PCs will have to bring out their platform, as they've committed to do.
Except for people are already voting.
Well, I know people have an opportunity. People do have an opportunity.
Advanced polls in this province already.
I want to change the subject because we're getting a little repetitive here. Okay, so right after the debate, a lot of people were upset with Andrea Horwath because she kept interrupting people, sometimes in an almost Trumpian way, saying, "Not true, that's wrong," right in the middle of someone's sentence. Now, was that because she's a woman and a different standard would be applied to a man, or was that because her brand is something different, and does it carry over into today?
I think at the end of the day, when people say such bald-face rhetoric and in some cases complete untruths, I think you have to call that out of what it is. And Andrea got that point across. People can debate whether or not it's a gender thing, but at the end of the day, Andrea is going to call out truths, and truths are sometimes not happy to see, but people are doing it. And look, at last election, Andrea was well known and well branded as the Steeltown Scrapper. People want somebody who is going to fight for them, but also be a premier. And what I saw on that stage last night from Andrea was the empathetic, caring, supportive leader who has a plan and a platform that is ready to go. And I didn't see that from Doug.
And what did you think of Andrea's performance and the interruptions?
I'll be really honest in saying that I thought she was scrappy and overall did a decent job in a debate setting. And at the same time, while I've seen this sort of meme, this conversation that she interrupted too much, it was not, to be perfectly honest, my impression at the end of the debate. But what I did hear come out through the course of the debate was the concerns that I thought the Premier raised very well, and I thought Doug did as well, is how much is this going to cost? The NDP plan looks so expensive. The energy file is a place to start. There's lots of ideas of making energy rates more affordable, but nothing in their plan. Well, they have a plan. I get it's costed with deficits staying the time. There's no explanation how they're going to push costs out of the system, and I think that's the worry for the NDP in this election. As you know, they've peaked, at midpoint. Have they reached their ceiling? Are people going to start looking at the cost of everything that's been on offer a little bit more closely as a result of where they are in this campaign today?
Well, I thought Andrea did actually quite a good job last night. I thought she did the job that she probably had to do. I thought, however, she was weak on the back-to-work legislation question.
That was a really good question from Kathleen Wynne.
And York University, unfortunately for her, is the best example. That has been a rogue union for 30 years that has created problems for 4 or 5 different presidents for 30 years and has always been way out there. It's the perfect example of why you do need to have the tool of back-to-work legislation, because you shouldn't let basically what's going on at York University today is a hostage taking, and it should end, and it needs to be legislated back to work tomorrow. And that should be one of the things that needs to get done. So I thought she was weak there. Other than that, I have to say I thought she was a good performance. And this business about her interrupting, it's a debate. Yeah. Of course she's interrupting. So you got to expect this isn't a tea party at the Windsor Arms, so you got to expect that sort of stuff. And I thought she did an all right job.
What about Kathleen Wynne? Does it matter what she did at this point?
Well, let's see. I'll be frank. I'm not part of the campaign team. I am a Liberal, but I will say, look, we're in tough. We're likely not forming a government this time out. Did it make a difference between the number of Liberals that get elected next time? I hope it does, and I hope we elect a lot more members. I thought Kathleen did a very, very good job. She worked hard. I thought she was measured, balanced. I thought she got most of her messages out. I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, she's the most accomplished debater. I thought, as far as providing a brief on what government would look like, she did a really good job. And I think it'll be the concern for the NDP that we saw Kathleen Wynne in some respects reintroduce herself. The sorry not sorry. I wasn't big on the actual language, but I think some self-awareness that she's not where she might like to be in terms of personal popularity. I thought that probably worked, and I could see some of the progressive left vacillating as to where they ultimately want to put their vote.
Okay, let's take a couple of calls. Okay, we've got Bernie in Mississauga. Hi, Bernie.
Yeah, how you doing, Libby?
Fine. How are you?
Yeah, very good debate last night. I was very. I look at Kathleen Wynne. She had a good night, but I think she's a spent force. I think Doug Ford would have been good about 30 or 40 years ago for that mentality. And as far as Angela Horvath, I think she did an excellent job. I think when Ford was telling his misdemeanors and not backing them up, that she called him out on it and said, "You're not telling the truth." And I think overall she did a very good thing, and I'll be voting NDP.
Okay. Thanks for that, Bernie.
Thanks, Bernie.
Okay. Jim in Hanover. Hi, Jim.
Hi. I just wanted to comment on Andrea. I thought she was very ignorant. I thought when people are talking, that it was their right to talk, their time, and she kept interrupting when they were talking. And to me, that shows a lack of class. And your staff there that said it's all right, it's a debate. Well, each one had time to speak. You don't interrupt when Mr. Ford is speaking. You listen. And as far as his platform, how can you have an accurate platform when you don't know what Wynne has done? You don't know what the books are. How much do we owe? How much can we do? It's all right to guess and say you're going to do all this, but you better find out what the books are and how deep in debt we really are before you go blasting off and spending money.
Did you change your mind, or is this kind of where you always were?
Confirmed me. I'm voting for it.
Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Yes. One by one. Bob, I'm afraid you're going to...
This is a lot like the polling data right now.
Yeah, you might have to wait a while before we get somebody voting Liberal here.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, John in Whitby. Hi, John.
Good afternoon. As far as an election goes, I think you're an absolute fool if you vote according to what the debate is. Running this province is not according to who wins a debate. One of the major factors in this election is debt. This province has more debt than the state of California. Now, how can you as a grandparent, and are there any grandparents with your talking heads there? I imagine there aren't, but how are you as a grandparent being able to pass this debt on to your grandchildren? It's absolutely stupid.
So did you change your mind? Anything you heard?
No, I don't care. I don't care whatever this thing called a platform is. I could care less. If he is going to save this province money, then fine. Go ahead and do it. You know, I look at Kathleen, the Liberals. I look at under her McGuinty. I look at Bob Ray with his Ray Day. And don't tell me that he had a very bad time. It was a recession and all that crap. And I look at what Mike Harris did. He did exactly what he said he was going to do, and he got voted in. So as far as I'm concerned, you got to save the money. It's as simple as that.
Okay, John, thanks for that.
So let's save the money with a guy who's going to cut hydro rates, cut taxes, not fire anybody, give away free beer or whatever that promise was on the weekend, and everything else.
I'm glad you're on side, Bob.
And has no fiscal plan. Perhaps maybe instead of focusing on the state of California, you might want to go read what he has to say and what he's saying, because he is no fiscal conservative.
And more importantly, there are expectations of what people expect a government of Ontario to be a part of and a delivery. And if I can just look back, and having spent a lot of time at Toronto City Hall, there are some serious concerns about the fiscal responsibility of what happened during the Ford administration. Bus routes were canceled. Firefighters were struggling. At the end of the day, there are lots of things you can look at and say, we're going to save 4% or whatever the number is. But when I start to look at that, that's 780 schools. That's a ton of nurses. And my father is in long-term care, and my nieces and nephews are in the school system. At the end of the day, I want to make sure people are taken care of. I want to make sure that they have a sense of hope, but also that our government is going to be there. Doug's tax cut is $18 for most of us, $1,200 for people like Doug. What is that going to get me? It doesn't even buy me a pizza at the end of the day. So I want to make sure I have the services that are necessary for my friends and my family to be taken care of. Not because I think government should be part of everything, but they should have a role to play in how we manage a society.
Okay, let's hear from Ron in Guelph. Hi, Ron.
Hello there. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm like Andrea Horwath last night. I was quite surprised the question about back-to-work legislation came from Kathleen Wynne, and not Doug Ford. But she danced around the subject as far as I'm concerned, because she never did answer. I remember what happened with the NDP in the early 90s when they banned strikebreakers, and all of a sudden there were a number of companies that I could mention in Ontario that decided to go south because the unions had so much power. And I think you spoke to that even last week, that are the unions going to use this as an excuse now to say, okay, it's like the rogue union you just mentioned at York University. A lot of these guys, and I'm a union person. I've been part of the ATU for over 20 years, but I've seen what happens when they get too much power as well.
So who are you voting?
Pardon?
Who are you voting for?
I will be voting for the Conservatives.
Wow. And did anything last night change your mind, or did you decide that beforehand?
Well, I decided that probably beforehand because I've seen what the Liberals have done for 15 years, and I'm really afraid of a lot of the ideas that the NDP has, but I'm afraid of what they're going to do if they do get in and they decide that, nope, they would never bring back-to-work legislation back, and the unions decide that we're going to hold, if they decide what would happen if a lot of these companies, if they hold, like the car companies and whatnot, if the unions hold the companies to ransom.
Okay, Ron, thanks for that.
Okay, thanks.
Let's go to Al in Brantford. Hi, Al.
I just want to say a word off the top. Open bid contracting for the province of Ontario would give Ford more than his 4% that he's looking for. I asked him personally at a meeting out here, would you go up and do what Dalton McGuinty promised twice? Wynne promised 3 times to open up the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario. There's tens of thousands of jobs up there waiting. I was in business back when Bob Rae was in power, and I was given keys to factories to get them emptied out of all the machinery for one purpose, to give it back to the landlord, because they were going out of the country heading south. Some went to Asia, some were going south to Georgia and Alabama. That's the difference between knowing how to run a business and not knowing how to run a business.
Okay, so should I gather from this you're voting for Ford?
I'll tell you, I know Andrea Horwath. My son lives in her riding, and I was totally disappointed in the way she performed last night, just as a person. It was just impolite, disgusting, anything you want to call it. Like a spoiled little kid not getting her way.
Ooh. Okay.
That's my take.
Okay, Al, thanks for that. Again, is she being held to a different standard because she's a woman?
Well, let me leap in here just for 2 seconds. I was Lynn McLeod's chief of staff in 1995, who was the first woman.
I covered that election.
Who was the first woman to be a political leader in Ontario. If she stood up and was tough in the legislature, she was called a word, which I think most of your listeners would know. And if the men did it, they were considered to be tough and doing their job. So there is a double standard for women here that is very tough. And I think she was trying to get in, and it's a debate. She's also been a parliamentarian for 10 years, and I think she's used to the sort of cut and thrust of those things. I think people are holding her to a standard that they wouldn't necessarily hold a man.
Let's talk about that election. I remember that election because
actually, this election reminds me a lot of that election.
Okay, so that was
parties reverse roles.
1995, and I remember this is like I think about these things in terms of like how good was my assignment. So about 3 weeks before the election, my boss came to me and said, "Lib, I'm going to let you be with the winner this time, Lynn McLeod."
But this election reminds me a bit of that. You have a governing party that's probably not going to be the governing party afterwards. Let's be frank and honest here. It was the NDP last time. It's the Liberals this time. You have an opposition party that's sort of measuring the drapes. That was us in 95. It's the Conservatives this time. And you have the third party whose leader was experienced, having been through an election with a pretty clear plan. And this time around, it's an experienced leader with a pretty clear plan. So although it's different parties, it's got the same feel to it. So and I have the stripe on my back to show for that.
Okay, well, and it's interesting that one of the themes last night, and actually the best question from the audience to each of them was, how will you make sure history doesn't repeat itself? And for Andrea Horwath, the Bob Rae government seems to be an albatross.
It is always the boogeyman that people want to bring up. And I just wrote an insight piece on hkinsights.ca, putting in a plug for my company, that was about, does Andrea have the bench strength? What was the experience like in the past? And how do you grow from that? I mean, at the end of the day, people learn from what has happened in the past. They learn from good experiences and not experience. And just as a caveat, Andrea wasn't part of the caucus in 1990. She wasn't part of the Rae government. And I think she has her own different stamp on things. But what I can tell you is that there were some, as much as people want to make jokes about some silly ministers stuff, there were also some extraordinary ministers like Francis Lankin, who's now a senator. And there were some things that happened that were really great. There are some things that, gosh, I wish I wasn't governing during a recession, but there we were. And we move on. But some people have long memories, and you can never let things go from then. At the end of the day, Andrea's put together an ambitious and achievable platform, and she's moving forward on it. And people are looking for these type of solutions. I look at things like time of use pricing on hydro. Goodness me, actually making dinner during dinner.
I can't believe, there's just a great example that I can't believe the NDP are abandoning time of use.
It's not about abandoning it. It's actually not worked on the conservation goals. So actually, let's help seniors to actually get things accomplished.
A party that believes that people need to see the price on carbon, for example, and then to abandon time of use, which we have put so much time and effort into as a province to put it in because we think it's important that people have an ability to manage their use, to avoid and save money. And I get now we say it's unfair to seniors, it's unfair, it's a sexist policy, it's unfair to women, but for a party that believes in the environment, for a party that wants to decarbonize the economy,
but at the end of the day, this is a
pull back on a policy that's already in place. It's just shocking to me.
But it's a policy that's not working. So just leaving a policy in place that isn't, frankly, hitting the achievable goals of reduction and use is ridiculous. It's a tax grab that doesn't have a relevance to people's lives. It's 20% of what people predicted it would be on conservation.
Okay,
so I think there should be transparency. I'm waiting for transparency from the Tories at this point. Get me a platform, and I'll tell you what to do, what you can do with it.
I'm jumping in, okay, because we have to take some calls from our listeners. Susan in Toronto, you're a first-time caller.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm a senior, almost 80 years old, and I'm very upset about people wanting something for nothing. Where is the money going to come from with this NDP platform? Everything is free. I mean, there's too many freebies. We have to earn our whatever we are entitled to. So we have to be concerned about debt in this province, which is astronomical. But my concern is mainly the debt and too many freebies from the NDPs.
Okay, so who are you going to vote for?
PC.
Okay, and did you decide that a long time ago?
Yes and no, on and off, back and forth, but definitely not NDP.
Okay, thanks, Susan, for that.
Thank you.
Let's go to John in Brampton. Hi, John.
Hi, Libby. I don't know who the people are that you have as guests, but I thought I had dialed into that television show, The View, where people talk over each other and say nothing. Anyway, I'm sorry. The point I wanted to make, number one, I'm voting Conservative, so there's buts or maybes. But am I the only person who's heard this? It seems that a little over a year ago, the NDP and the Liberals made a deal that really gave Kathleen Wynne an opportunity to stay on for a couple of months or 6 months, whatever.
I'm going to stop you right there because it sounds everybody's frowning and shaking their heads. I certainly have never heard that. So I don't think we should put it on air. It doesn't sound like anything that has any credibility at all.
It does. It does. This was coming from one of the people in the NDP.
Oh, well, we have head shaking here. So, John, thanks for telling us where your ballot will be going.
I do think that in a minority government situation, it's not hard to contemplate the Liberals and the NDP some sort of cooperation. They are aligned in many ways. We heard it in the debate last night where Ms. Horvath and Ms. Wynne both complimented that we come from similar spaces. So. As people look to the potential outcomes of this election, I think it is possible to contemplate the Liberals and the NDP cooperating.
I'm not sure I 100% agree with you on that. I think it is difficult to cooperate with Doug Ford from what you can see so far and based on his track record at City Hall. But if they don't win a clear election, I wouldn't be surprised to see him shown the door by Conservatives either after this election because expectations are so high. There are other people in the Conservative Party who are more reasonable to deal with. And I wouldn't
You
write
mean
that.
while he's premier?
Well, let's see if he's premier.
If he's premier.
He could be a Frank Miller premier where he gets the most seats, but it is in a minority and comes in with stuff that's unacceptable to the majority of the elected members of the legislature and is shown the door.
When I look at the
happened
numbers,
in 1985.
When I look at my take on what's happening as of today, I don't see a minority government.
You know what? I tend to agree. I think, and the Conservatives have a very efficient vote, which tends to skew older, and older people tend to vote. So I think the NDP are far from home free at this point. I think they're poised to be in a good position to make some gains, but they've got a lot more work to do if they're going to be there to secure a government.
Well, I hate to say this to you, Bob, but I think we're a minority is unlikely because I don't think the Liberals are going to have enough to hold a balance of power.
Well, that's why Kathleen's performance was important last night. I think she did do the job she needed to do, but we're in tough. There's no question about that. I think if everything goes well for us, you get 20 seats or something like that. If everything doesn't go well for you, you get a whole lot less than that. So, I think right now our job, and look, we've been in office for 15 years. This happened. It happened with the Harper government. We can go through a whole variety of other ones. Our job is to remind Liberals of the record of things that we've done well and to ask them for their vote as the party looks to rebuild as it goes forward.
And I think at the end of the day, Andrea has been quite clear. She is not interested in making any sort of minority deals with the Liberals because, frankly, there are far too many things around hydro privatization, for example, that the Liberals and the Conservatives, frankly, agree on. There might be some tinkering around the edges, but I don't see Doug bringing hydro back into public hands, and certainly Kathleen is not willing to do that either. So there are a lot of things that are off the table, and after 15 years of Liberal governments that haven't quite gotten it done, the NDP have some serious concerns about their willingness to actually move on items that are of importance to everyday Ontarians.
Okay, well, let's hear from Don in Toronto. I think you have something to say about that. Hi, Don.
How are you today?
Fine.
Yeah, first of all, I didn't catch everybody's name at the beginning, but I heard the lady there say a few minutes ago,
Kim Wright,
that she would only get like $18, wouldn't buy a pizza. Well, let me tell you something, lady. There's people out there that can't even afford a pizza. The second thing is the NDP made a deal when Andrea went to the Liberals and we're going to cut the car insurance. When was that, a year and a half ago?
That was when the Liberals had a minority.
Yeah.
And the Liberals went back on the deal.
That's right. So what did Andrea do? Doesn't she go fight for the people if they do this and say they're going to cut it? Or we just let it slide under the table like everything else? The Liberal government is a piece of you-know-what. I've watched these people in my neighborhood. There's a lot of elderly people here. All I hear about is free pills, free this, free that. You know that some of these seniors, their health is fine, but they're eating soup because they can't afford anything else. Health is fine for everybody, but what about these people who can't put potatoes on the table?
Okay, so what is your question then? Are you criticizing the NDP or the Conservatives or the Liberals for breaking their promises?
No, I'm a Conservative 100%. And I even heard on your news station today about, what's his name, Thomas at City Hall, like spending $75,000.
Thompson.
Pardon me?
Michael Thompson.
Yeah.
That's a whole other
I know it's a
level
whole
of
other can
government.
Of worms, but all I'm saying is, why aren't they lowering the taxes so seniors can survive? And another thing, the stupid city, the kids get on the bus for free, and then they say they got no money. Why can't they charge a quarter?
Okay, that's a whole other discussion, Don. And we have a municipal.
I'll get off the phone. The NDP, I wouldn't trust her with my dog. The Wynne government, we already know what she did. Doug Ford, he'll move forward because he wants to save people money.
Okay.
You have a good day.
Thanks, Don.
I think it's safe to say you're holding your base.
Well, thank you. And I do, there is an idea in conflict in this election that Ontarians will have to sort out. And what does a more affordable life look like? And while the NDP will have you believe that a tax cut isn't really going to help help you. I also think people look at the promises like free daycare, free pharmacare, free this, free that, no real plan on hydro, and that life can start looking really expensive too. There's different ways, of course, to make life more affordable. I think the difference in daycare approaches, for example, and there was an interesting exchange about that last night. Fully licensed,
capped with a zinger, where Kathleen Wynne said to Doug Ford, "Have you ever been to a daycare?"
Yeah.
But he said they close at 4:30. I'm sure they don't. They close at 5.
Yeah, well, and
5 or 6, and if you are late, if you have to work, too bad.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people who won't be able to use the fully licensed daycare the way it's designed. It's the nature of that offering. Whereas the conservative approach is to put some money in people's hands, and whether they're using formal daycare or they're using it more informal settings. This is what my wife and I used often for our children as well. I think those ideas of leaving more money in people's hands does represent affordability, and I do think there'll be a big group of people who are looking for that come election day.
Daryl in Toronto. Hello, Daryl.
Hi, how you doing today?
Fine. How are you?
I'm hanging in. Anyway, the question I have basically lately, Doug Ford and the Conservatives trying to lay what the NDP government of Bob Rae did upon Horwath and the current NDPs. Is that true, or is that just their idea of a joke?
Well, they're trying to make that stick. You tell me.
Well, I mean, my concern is if they want to make that way, then are they willing to accept responsibility for terrorist government, let's say, selling off the 407 to international investors and giving all those profits away that could have been coming to our province?
Look, I think all parties have past governments in their history that and if we take the best or the worst moments from any of them.
I think a yes or no answer would do.
Oh.
Which, as the Conservative, are you willing to accept that responsibility too, or you just want to lay past parties on current ones now for
Look, if we want to have a debate about past parties, I'm really happy to talk about what Mike Harris accomplished in Ontario, but. You tell me.
Well, in terms of the 407, why did he sell it off? So that he could, juggle his books at the time? And what damage did he do to the province?
I have to say that
on the Conservatives now.
I asked Doug Ford about that.
Right.
And his answer was fair enough. Yeah. That it was not a brilliant move, certainly in retrospect. But what I'm taking from you, Daryl, is that you're going to vote NDP, correct?
Listen, last election I voted for Kathleen Wynne, and I cannot in good conscience do that again. And there's no way I could vote for Doug Ford. There's no real substance going on there. There's been no real scrutiny of the person. How many years did it take to scrutinize Mr. Brown and get him thrown out of there? And then Doug Ford jumps in a little.
So what are you going to do?
Minute.
What are you going?
I guess I'm going to have to vote NDP.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing with us.
Okay, and I'd like to hear some answers from the Conservatives on that thing, other than fair. If they're not going to hold responsibility for it for themselves, then they shouldn't be trying to hold other governments from 20 years ago, over their heads of people now.
Okay. I don't know.
I don't disagree in that there are some things that people need to have a look at. Are we entering another situation where we get into a Walkerton all over again because we're privatizing agriculture services? We don't frankly know what the Ford administration, a potential Ford administration, might want to cut.
It's one thing to privatize, but you also have to make sure that you privatize with the right provider.
Sure, and those are questions. I mean, at the end of the day, 407 being privatized wasn't something that we would have done. It's certainly not something we're a fan of, and frankly, we opposed. Similar to last night, with the absurdity of Doug suggesting that Andrea and the New Democrats didn't oppose hydro privatization. They've been opposing hydro privatization since I was at Queen's Park. That is not new. They have been doing it. They have been raising that alarm bell, and frankly, Howard Hampton being referred to as was a prophet on what was going to happen in terms of hydro privatization. At the end of the day, there are lessons to be learned from history, but there are also things that you can do as a government to do things better. And I think that's what Andrea has put together in this 100-page platform, Change for the Better, because it doesn't have to be this way.
I take the point, and I believe, that the NDP believes that almost all services in Ontario are best delivered 100% from public hands. The reality is there are efficiencies to be gained by looking to involving the private sector where possible. The private sector is already involved throughout the healthcare system, for example. We have a single payer, government-provided OHIP system, which works very well. But the private sector is an important player in many aspects of how healthcare is actually delivered. That doesn't mean people are paying to go see their doctor. They're accessing that service through their health card, I think the Liberals have done this, and truthfully, it would continue under the NDP in many respects. And I think the PCs as well know that there are multiple ways to deliver services to Ontarians, and you have to find the best way to do it. You have to put all the protections in place. I get that, but there are savings to be found.
I agree, and I think that's one of the weaknesses of the NDP is they've got a bit of ideological blinkers on here, and also a little bit too beholden to some of the bigger public sector unions. We do not need public sector responses to every single problem in this province, and I'm going to be critical of my own leader at this point and say there was too much of that in the last 2 or 3 years with the Wynne government. Perfect example of that is marijuana. There is no reason on the planet that the LCBO needs to run that. It needs to be regulated by government. We need to be tough in terms of the regulation, and it could be run by the private sector. Everything doesn't need to be run by OPSU, and everything doesn't need to be run by public sector corporations like the LCBO.
Okay, let's hear from Bob in Etobicoke. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Now, there's a couple of things I've noted, and since somebody was talking about the selling of Highway 407, nobody has mentioned whether the corporation or how much taxes that corporation that owns a highway has paid into the provincial government in taxes or to the federal government.
Look, they certainly would have paid taxes. The truth of the matter.
Why don't we know how much?
But I'm sure we do. I don't happen to have the number, but okay. I'm just telling you that I think it's universally viewed by most observers as not a great business deal.
They're making a huge amount of money.
They're making tons of money, and it's paid for itself many times over. And that's not to say that the model is necessarily bad. That individual transaction probably wasn't the best transaction that ever happened on the planet.
Well, when I look at the 407, when it was sold, is now nearly double the size of it that it was then. But I'm not in favor of it. I won't drive on it because I'm not paying the double the tax. I'm not paying the 15 cents a kilometer and then paying the gas tax on top of that. So I won't use
Bob,
it.
did this debate change your mind on anything?
No, not really. But what I am upset about is that the NDP and the Liberals are looking at cutting corporate taxes. Well, corporations, they keep the money they need to operate their business, and the rest of the money, they dividend it out to shareholders.
Just a minute, you mean they want to increase corporate taxes?
They want to increase it, yes. Sorry.
And that you're upset by
that.
that.
And that money is being taken out of pension funds because pension funds and mutual funds and private individuals hold shares in these corporations, and they get paid dividends. And that's where, so if you're taking, increasing the corporate tax, you are taking the money away from pensioners because their pension funds are going to be losing money. Their dividends, if they're private shareholders, are going to be taken away.
Okay.
And I don't agree with that.
Okay, Bob, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't know how big an issue that is.
Well, I don't know how big of an issue it is for the average Ontarian corporate taxes. But I will say that if people spend some time and think about the context and the times we find ourselves in, where south of the border they're reducing taxes, corporate taxes, where south of the border energy has never been cheaper, and fracking and all these reasons. You can make any value judgments and look into it as you want. But by comparison, operating a business in Ontario has gotten more expensive. The minimum wage is another factor in that. So I do believe it has an impact on our success as an economy, and they are issues that Ontarians would do well to consider.
So I think there's the conversations about corporate tax, but there's also about quality of life. And these are the types of things that people who are investing in businesses want to make sure that their employees can get to work on time. So there are investments in public transit that need to occur. You want to have a skilled workforce. You want to have people who aren't sick, who can actually do their jobs, and, you know, if they're part of a gig economy, that they are taken care of. And all of these things go into a broader conversation about what kind of community. It isn't just about corporate taxes. That's part of the discussion, absolutely, but it can't be the end-all and be-all, because if it's the end-all and be-all, then we wouldn't still be on the short list for Amazon.
Okay, wait. We are starting to run out of time, and I want to make sure that each of you gets an opportunity to leave us with something substantive. I don't know if you're ready to make a prediction. I actually called our AI person who has the AI computer, and they're not ready because things are so much still in flux. So, Bob, prediction?
My prediction is it'll be an interesting election night. I'm going to take a pass at this point. I think it's still a little bit in play. I think Andrea Horwath is on the move, but I think the Conservatives have an efficient vote. I think Kathleen Wynne did a very good job for the Liberals last night, and I think might be able to attract some of that traditional Liberal vote home. I don't expect them to form the next government, but I think they may be able to maximize some of the seats that would have been maybe a little bit on the bubble. So, interesting evening. Stay tuned. Get some popcorn. Relax. It's going to be a long night, I think.
Kim?
I think we are in times where people are taking a real look at what Andrea Horwath and her team, and there is a team around her of really experienced parliamentarians, as well as staff and some really quality candidates that just might surprise how good that they are going to be when they get there. Now, I'm a superstitious type, as most political folks are. We don't like making predictions. We don't like to get too far ahead of ourselves. This is why measuring the drapes is such a dangerous thing. So
she says, looking at Mike.
I say, looking at my conservative friends.
Okay, so let Mike go.
Sure. Look, I'm going to first take Doug's photo op today. I thought was interesting. I thought putting together that group was important. I think the real test will be, now that we're at this point, when Ontarians really look at the NDP plan, will it look affordable? And that's the question I think Ontarians are going to wrestle with in the coming 10 days or whatever is left. And they'll have a real choice between the PCs and the Conservatives. As Bob points out, the PC vote's pretty efficient. I still think they're well placed to win.
And if you don't like either of those, we're happy to take your vote.
Okay, that is all the time we have. Callers, if we couldn't get to this, rest assured, we will be talking about this again before June the 7th. You guys are great. Thank you so much. Kim Wright, Mike Van Soelen, and Bob Richardson. Come back anytime.
Thanks, Libby.
Thanks for having us.